Have you ever hesitated to share something, not because of fear, but because of an invisible line someone once taught you not to cross? Have you ever watched someone quietly break that line, not to rebel, but because another soul deserved to be seen, to be touched, to be included? If so, you belong here, where we share real stories that remind us, kindness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply accepts a spoon, already used. Before we begin today's story, if you believe the world needs more quiet bravery, more silent bridges built with simple gestures, please like, subscribe, and stay with us till the end. Because today, what changed a billionaire father's heart wasn't a speech. It was one woman and one spoon, passed gently without fear. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind where sunlight filters through glass like warm honey, landing softly on empty tables and half-folded napkins. The lunch rush had come and gone, leaving the little restaurant just outside Savannah nearly still, save for the gentle clink of silverware and the occasional shuffle of a chair against the floor. At a small corner table near the window, a 6-year-old boy named Eli sat with his dessert, a modest bowl of vanilla ice cream slowly melting into sweetness. Eli was not like most children his age. He had Down syndrome, which made coordination difficult. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the plastic spoon, and every few bites, it would slip from his fingers, clattering against the table or falling to the floor. But he was determined. He didn't want help. He never liked it when someone else tried to take over. Across the room, Lana, 30, white, quiet, watched him out of the corner of her eye. She wasn't just any waitress. Before this job, she'd spent 2 years volunteering at a care center for children with developmental challenges. She had learned, more than anything, how to wait. How to observe. How not to interrupt. There was something sacred in giving a child the dignity of trying. She moved with quiet grace, placing a refill at one table, clearing a plate from another. Her hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and her uniform was simple, clean, unassuming. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was soft and sincere. Eli's father, Mr. Dominic Ward, sat several feet away, angled just slightly behind the boy. A powerful man in his late 50s, Dominic was known in the world of industrial investments, but in this room, he was just a man in a tailored navy suit, watching his son with a practiced kind of distance. He had always insisted on separate utensils. Wipes for the table. Gloves when needed. Not because he didn't love his son, but because he had been taught over time that love meant protection, and protection sometimes looked like walls. Eli's spoon dropped again. It bounced on the linoleum and spun under the table. Before Dominic could react, Lana was already there, kneeling quietly beside the boy's chair. She didn't say anything. She didn't scold or ask permission. She simply picked up the spoon, looked Eli gently in the eyes, and paused. And that's when it happened. Eli, eyes bright and trusting, held out his hand, not to take the spoon back, but to offer it. To her. As if inviting her in. As if saying, "You try." Lana blinked once, slowly. She looked around the room. The manager was behind the counter, pretending not to notice. Dominic was watching, his expression unreadable. There was no script for this moment. No protocol. No rule book. Without a word, Lana scooped a small amount of the melting ice cream and brought the spoon to her mouth. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She tasted the same spoon Eli had used, an ordinary act made extraordinary by its intimacy. And Eli beamed. There was no applause. No grand statement. Just a shared bite of vanilla, and a wall, centuries of distance and sterile politeness, gently crumbling between them. Dominic sat back in his chair, hands folded, lips pressed tightly together. He didn't speak. But his eyes flickered, not with anger, not even confusion, but something softer. Something closer to awe. The manager, ever alert to public image, took a step forward, clearly preparing to say something. Lana didn't look at him. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, Eli wasn't a child with special needs. He was just a boy sharing dessert with someone who saw him as normal. Not pitied. Not avoided. Just accepted. No one clapped. No one gasped. But something shifted. A boundary moved. And a man who had built his life on control, on caution, on keeping everything clean and contained, found himself witnessing the first time his son had been fully seen, and not turned away. From across the room, the shift manager had been watching. He had seen the whole thing, the dropped spoon, the silent invitation, the moment Lana had accepted and eaten from the same utensil as the boy. His name was Mr. Harris, a tall balding man in his 40s with a sharp part in his hair and an even sharper sense of decorum. He prided himself on running a tight front of house, where uniforms were crisp, smiles were measured, and the line between staff and customers was clear and clean. He stepped forward now, his shoes tapping the tiled floor with a rhythm of irritation. His voice, when it arrived, was low but taut with disapproval. "That's not sanitary," he said, the words cutting through the quiet. Lana straightened up slowly, turning to face him without flinching. There was no defensiveness in her voice, no apology, no challenge. Just clarity. "It was kindness," she said. Mr. Harris's mouth tightened. He looked as though he might argue, might pull her aside for a talk, but something about the way she stood, grounded, unashamed, made him hesitate. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Behind her, Eli giggled. With a gleam of mischief, he scooped another spoonful of melting vanilla and held it out again, this time with a more deliberate flourish. His arm extended across the table, eyes wide, grin uncontainable. There was no shyness now, no hesitation. "More?" he asked. Lana didn't look to see if Harris was still watching. She didn't glance at Dominic or scan the room for judgment. Instead, she leaned in, just a little, and took the second bite. Same spoon. Same smile. Still no fear. And Eli lit up like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone not to refuse him. There was nothing performative in her gesture. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It wasn't a statement made to provoke, to impress, or to be seen. It was just response. A simple human response to a child's offer, a child who so rarely got to share, to give, to be part of something normal. Dominic Ward, still sitting in his chair several feet away, didn't move. His eyes, however, did. They flicked from the spoon, to Lana's face, to his son's delighted expression. His fingers pressed against each other, tented beneath his chin. A man used to calculating risk, cost, return, he found himself unable to quantify what had just occurred. Something had shifted, and for once, it wasn't because of him. Mr. Harris lingered, unsure whether to assert control or step back. The script had failed him. Policy was supposed to dictate behavior, but Lana hadn't broken a rule out of ignorance. She'd bypassed it with purpose. It was hard to reprimand something done with such still, unshakable grace. In the corner, a family that had just entered watched curiously. A young mother nudged her toddler gently, whispering something with a small smile. No one gasped. No one protested. And yet, everyone noticed. The world didn't tilt off its axis. The restaurant didn't fall apart. But a line, however faint, had been crossed, and not with a dramatic shout, but with a spoon and a woman who believed in the right kind of closeness. For Lana, it was not the first time she'd shared space with someone different. But perhaps it was the first time it had been so public. She didn't mind. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just honoring the purest kind of invitation. Because when a child offers you a spoon they've just used, not out of need, but generosity, it's not really about the ice cream. It's about being trusted to receive it. Eli, oblivious to the tension, took another bite himself, then giggled again as if the shared spoon had magically turned them into teammates. In his world, there were no protocols, just people who accepted or people who turned away. Today, Lana had not turned away. And that made all the difference. Dominic Ward had never been the kind of man who left things to chance. He had built his empire by anticipating problems before they happened, by setting boundaries so meticulously that chaos rarely had a place to enter. He kept antibacterial wipes in every vehicle, a folded handkerchief in every coat. His son Eli, sweet and unpredictable as he was, had been the only variable Dominic couldn't quite systematize. From his seat, just a few tables away, Dominic had full view of the scene, though he wasn't sure at what point he stopped sipping his coffee and started staring. Maybe it was the first spoonful Lana had taken, or maybe it was the second. Maybe it was when Eli laughed and reached out again, as if the moment had been his all along. Dominic's face was still, but his jaw was tight. His eyes moved rapidly between his son's hands and the woman's face. It was the kind of scanning he often did in boardrooms, reading motives, checking for risk, gauging outcomes. But this was different. There was no spreadsheet, no contract. Just a moment unfolding that he had no control over. He shifted in his seat. His body leaned forward slightly, as if he might intervene. As if he might walk over and remind Lana of the protocols, of the importance of hygiene, the necessity of distance, the reason those rules existed. His fingers touched the edge of the table, ready to rise. And then, he stopped. His eyes met Eli's again. The boy wasn't distressed. He wasn't confused. He wasn't even aware of the ripple his action had caused. He was simply happy. Engaged. Connected. Dominic exhaled slowly and sat back. His hand withdrew from the table's edge, folding instead into his lap. His mouth, still pursed, began to loosen. He looked out the window. There was traffic passing in slow waves, people moving through their day. But his attention remained inside the restaurant, tethered to that table and that spoon. He didn't understand what he was feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was something far quieter, and far more uncomfortable. A recognition. A nudge inside the ribs. Lana hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't checked the files or consulted a therapist or waited for him to nod. She had simply responded to a boy's gesture, with no calculation, no fear. And in doing so, she had done something Dominic had never managed to do himself. She had treated his son like a person, not a project. Not a patient. Just a little boy with ice cream and a smile and a spoon he wanted to share. Dominic's mind flicked back to all the times he'd pulled out fresh utensils from his briefcase, the times he'd wiped Eli's hands 3 times before allowing him to touch a public surface. He remembered the nervous looks from strangers, the flinches of other parents. He had gotten so good at guarding Eli, at shielding him from embarrassment or ridicule, that he hadn't realized how much he'd also been shielding others, from knowing his son. From seeing him. He felt the familiar pressure behind his eyes, the kind he hadn't allowed since the diagnosis, since the specialists first explained what Eli would and wouldn't be able to do. He had resolved back then to be strong, to be strategic. And now, for the first time in years, he was watching someone be neither, and somehow, it was exactly what his son needed. Dominic didn't rise again. He didn't call Lana over or make a scene. He just sat there, his gaze still drifting but his ears wide open. Every sound, Eli's giggle, Lana's quiet voice, the soft scrape of the spoon, was magnified. This wasn't a moment he would have ever written into his day. It wasn't scheduled or vetted. But it was happening right here, in the middle of his carefully ordered life. And for the first time, Dominic realized, maybe Eli didn't need more protection. Maybe he just needed more people like her. That evening, Dominic Ward sat alone in his home office, the lights dimmed low, the only sound the soft ticking of an antique wall clock. His jacket was draped neatly over the back of the leather chair, his sleeves rolled up, as he stared at the open file on his desk. The folder was thick, worn at the edges from years of updates, consultations, appointments. It was Eli's medical record, a chronicle of every diagnosis, every therapy, every recommendation from specialists who had shaped the careful world Dominic had built around his son. He flipped through the pages slowly, methodically. Test results. Physical therapy reports. Notes from pediatricians. A printed list of dietary restrictions. And finally, near the back, a highlighted line he had read too many times to count. Shared eating environments must be sanitized thoroughly. Exposure should be limited to ensure controlled conditions. He had followed that line like gospel. Restaurants with sanitized silverware. Private seating whenever possible. Backup utensils in his briefcase, just in case. It wasn't about obsession, it was about doing the right thing. About protecting Eli. About giving him the safest life possible in a world that didn't always offer second chances. But now tonight, that line sat on the page like a sentence handed down from a court that had never seen the boy behind it. Dominic reached for his pen. He stared at the words for a moment longer, then, without ceremony, drew a line straight through them. A single, clean strike. No rage. No flourish. Just certainty. And beneath the crossed-out text, he wrote, "What he needs is someone to stay." He capped the pen. Folded the file. And for the first time since Eli was diagnosed, slid the folder into the drawer without locking it. The key, long a reflexive gesture, clicking shut a world too fragile for intrusion, remained untouched. He let the drawer close softly. No click. No barrier. For years, Dominic had equated safety with control. If he could just follow the instructions, clean the surfaces, watch the hands, filter the environment, he could keep Eli from being hurt. But what Lana had done in that small cafe, with one simple act, had shown him something those pages never could. Eli didn't need to be protected from the world. He needed to be part of it. He needed to be accepted, not accommodated. To be seen, not as a case to manage, but as a person who could offer, invite, and yes, even share. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his eyes unfocused now, staring at the ceiling as if the answer to every question might be written there. He remembered Eli's face when Lana had taken that second bite, how his son had lit up, proud, included, equal. No therapy had ever produced that look. No medical breakthrough had come close. All it took was someone who didn't flinch. The kind of closeness Dominic had always feared wasn't contagious. It wasn't dangerous. What was dangerous, he realized now, was distance disguised as care. Rules that became walls. Cleanliness that came at the cost of connection. He looked at the drawer again, now closed but unlocked. It felt like something had shifted, not just in policy, but in posture. In the way he saw his son. In the way he saw himself. It wasn't the diagnosis that had kept Eli at arm's length. It was Dominic's quiet belief that the world wouldn't accept his son unless it was controlled, scrubbed, contained. But now he knew better. Sometimes, love didn't look like caution. Sometimes, it looked like letting someone eat from the same spoon. It was exactly 1 week later when Lana saw him again. The restaurant was just as quiet as before, the mid-morning light slipping through the windows and laying soft gold across the polished floor. There were only a handful of customers scattered throughout, but Lana didn't need to be told which table to go to. He was already waiting. Dominic Ward sat at the same corner spot, a closed, elegant box in front of him. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a faint smile resting at the corners of his lips. It wasn't the kind of smile that asked to be noticed. It was the kind that had taken its time to arrive. As Lana approached, he rose slightly from his chair in a gesture of courtesy, then nodded toward the seat across from him. "I wanted to give you something," he said, his voice low and steady. He pushed the box forward, just a few inches. She hesitated, not out of discomfort, but out of instinct, the same quiet patience she showed in every interaction. Then gently, she lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of soft velvet, was a small silver spoon. The handle was polished, graceful, but it wasn't the shine that caught her breath. It was the engraving. "Thank you for not handing him a clean one." For a moment, Lana said nothing. Her fingers brushed the spoon delicately, as if the message itself might vanish if touched too hard. Then she looked up at him, no words, just a deep and knowing stillness in her eyes. Dominic didn't explain. He didn't need to. The gift said everything he hadn't been able to put into words that day, watching her from across the restaurant as she met his son without fear, without hesitation, without gloves. She nodded once. Not out of surprise, but out of understanding. From the corner of the table, a small voice piped up. Eli had been sitting beside his father, a plastic spoon already in his hand and a fresh bowl of ice cream in front of him. He leaned forward, eyes bright, holding out the spoon as if no time had passed since the last time he'd done it. "You want more?" he asked. Lana smiled, not wide, not showy, but full and real, and crouched slightly so she was eye level with him. "Always," she said softly. The spoon passed between them once more. No gasps, no judgment, no hesitation. And in that moment, what had once been seen as unsanitary, unprofessional, even inappropriate, was now a gesture sacred in its simplicity. A child who had been used to flinches was met, again, with presence. A waitress who had simply followed her instinct now held a piece of engraved silver, because someone finally saw that the smallest acts can carry the greatest weight. And a father, who had once defined care by control, now understood something quieter. Closeness isn't reckless. It's redemptive. Lana stood again, tucking the box gently under her arm. She didn't linger, didn't draw attention. She just turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving behind nothing but warmth. Dominic looked after her for a moment, then turned to his son. Eli was already digging back into his bowl, content, free, entirely unaware of the walls that had crumbled around him. And somewhere inside Dominic's chest, something soft but firm settled. A line had been crossed. Not in defiance, but in grace. Not for a point, but for a boy. One spoon. One moment. And a father who finally had no reason left to stay distant. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves with loud applause or dramatic gestures. Sometimes, the most powerful shift happens quietly, across a table, through a shared spoon, in the soft courage of someone choosing connection over comfort. This story reminds us of something many of us forget as we grow older, that dignity is not always found in perfection or politeness, but in presence. For years, Dominic Ward had tried to love his son the best way he knew how, by protecting him, by managing every detail, by shielding him from the world's unkindness. And yet, it was one simple act, not by him but by a stranger, that showed his son what it meant to be fully accepted. Not tolerated. Not pitied. Just included. Lana didn't offer Eli a sanitized spoon. She accepted his. In doing so, she accepted him. In a world that too often separates us with invisible rules, of class, of health, of fear, what bridges those divides isn't policy or protocol. It's humanity. And for those of us who have lived long enough to see how hard the world can be, this story is a gentle reminder. Sometimes, kindness is not in what we say, but in what we are willing to share. Not in what we keep clean, but in what we're willing to touch, with care, with trust, and without flinching. Perhaps you remember a time in your life when someone crossed an invisible line for you, when they chose you instead of their own comfort. Or maybe you were the one who said, "I'll sit with you. I'll eat with you. I'll stay." These moments don't fade with time. They become our legacy. So if you're watching this, and you've ever wondered if a small gesture can still change the world, know that it can. Because the world doesn't need more clean spoons. It needs more people who aren't afraid to hold the ones already offered. If someone ever chose to share a spoon with you, if you've ever felt seen, not avoided, because someone chose not to switch out what had already been used, then hold on to that memory. Sometimes, the cleanest thing is a spoon that's already been used by someone who just wanted you to feel full. Like and subscribe, and share with us who once sat beside you when you thought no one would.